Behind every locked door lies a story the world was never meant to hear. Welcome to Behind Bars TV, where we uncover the hidden realities of the world's toughest prisons, untold inmate experiences, and the systems built to contain them. From Supermax facilities to forgotten penitentiaries, we reveal the truth behind concrete walls and razor wire. This is not fiction. This is the world behind bars. There are prisons that punish, and then there are prisons that erase. For nearly a century, the United States has built institutions meant to contain the uncontainable. Men who ruled gangs, ignited riots, and defied every rule the system ever made. From the fog-covered isolation of Alcatraz to the concrete silence of ADX Florence, this is the story of how America built a chain of fortresses, each one colder, smarter, and more unforgiving than the last. They were designed not to rehabilitate, but to control. This isn't just a story about prisons. It's a story about fear, politics, power, and the price of creating a place that promises no escape. Alcatraz, the rock that started it all. When Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary opened in 1934, it wasn't just another prison. It was a message. A message to every gangster, killer, and escape artist in America. You can run from justice, but you can't run from the rock. In the roaring 1920s and early 1930s, America was battling an epidemic of organized crime. Men like Al Capone, Machine Gun Kelly, and George Babyface Nelson turned entire cities into battlefields. The federal government needed a place for those who were too powerful, too violent, or too famous for regular prisons. So they built Alcatraz, a fortress carved into an island of stone, surrounded by icy waters and deadly tides. Inside, the rules were brutal. Inmates were granted 4 rights only: food, clothing, shelter, and medical care. Everything else, reading, talking, or even smiling, had to be earned. The silence rule was legendary. Men went days, weeks, sometimes years, without hearing another human voice. Alcatraz became home to some of the most notorious inmates in U.S. history. Al Capone, who traded the roar of Chicago's streets for a mop in the prison laundry. Robert Stroud, the Birdman of Alcatraz, who studied medicine from inside so lightery. And Frank Morris, whose 1962 escape, with the Anglin brothers, remains one of the greatest mysteries in American history. When the Rock closed in 1963, the government said it was too expensive to maintain. But Alcatraz didn't just close. It transformed. It left behind a blueprint. The idea that isolation could break even the strongest men. A seed was planted, and soon it would grow into something far darker. Marion, the birth of the Supermax. When Alcatraz shut down, officials asked one question: how do we control inmates too dangerous for the rest of the system? The answer stood in the heartland, USP Marion, Illinois. Built to replace Alcatraz, Marion would become the birthplace of something far more sinister, the modern Supermax. At first, Marion functioned like any other high-security prison, but by the 1970s, the violence inside America's prisons was escalating. Radical groups, racial gangs, and syndicates like the Aryan Brotherhood, Black Guerrilla Family, and Mexican Mafia turned prison yards into war zones. Then came 1983, a day that would change everything. 2 correctional officers, Merle Klutz and Robert Hoffman, were brutally murdered in separate attacks by inmates Thomas Silverstein and Clayton Fountain, both members of violent gangs. The warden's response was historic. He placed the entire prison on permanent lockdown. Inmates spent 23 hours a day in their cells. No contact, no yard, no programs. Marion became the first prison in U.S. history to operate in total isolation, a control unit, and it worked. Violence dropped. Escape attempts vanished. But there was a cost. Inmates described hearing voices, losing track of time, and feeling their minds decay. One prisoner wrote, "You begin to talk to the walls, and the walls start talking back." Officials called it control. Psychologists called it clean torture. Marion had to prove in something powerful. If you can't control a man's body, control his mind. And from that experiment, a new era began. One that would redefine American punishment forever. The science of silence. Isolation isn't just physical. It's psychological warfare. By the late 1980s, solitary confinement had become the system's secret weapon. Inmates lived in 8 by 10 cells. No windows, no clocks, no voices. Lights stayed on 24/7. Meals came through a slot in the door. After weeks, the human brain starts to change. After months, reality begins to slip. Doctors began documenting what they called SHU syndrome, named after the special housing units that kept prisoners locked away. Symptoms included paranoia, hallucinations, anxiety, and self-harm. Some inmates began talking to insects, others to themselves. For some, silence became unbearable. They'd beg for noise, for chaos, for anything that reminded them they were still alive. Yet despite the evidence, prisons expanded their use of isolation. Because for the system, solitary confinement worked. Fewer riots, easier control, and most importantly, a way to show the public that America was still tough on crime. The Supermax era had begun, and soon, a new fortress would rise in the mountains of Colorado that would redefine what control really meant. ADX Florence, the clean version of hell. Built in the remote desert of Colorado, ADX Florence was designed for one purpose: to hold the most dangerous men in America in total silence. Federal officials called it the Alcatraz of the Rockies. Journalists called it a concrete tomb. It was the final stop for inmates who had escaped, killed, or ordered violence even from behind bars. Inside ADX, everything was built for isolation. Each cell is a 7 by 12-foot concrete box. The bed, desk, and stool are made from poured concrete. Windows are slit-like, angled so inmates can see only the sky, never the horizon. Inmates spend 23 hours a day in their cells. Their recreation time is 1 hour, alone, in a small concrete pen known as the cage. The prisoners here include names known around the world. Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. Ramzi Youssef, who bombed the World Trade Center in 1993. Richard Reed, the shoe bomber. Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, the Boston Marathon bomber. And Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, the drug lord who escaped every prison. Except this one. ADX. Florence isn't chaos. It's order. Sterile, controlled, and absolute. Here, time doesn't pass. It simply stops. ADX Florence. The clean version of hell. Built in the remote desert of Colorado, ADX Florence was designed for one purpose: to hold the most dangerous men in America in total silence. Federal officials called it the Alcatraz of the Rockies. Journalists called it a concrete tomb. It was the final stop for inmates who had escaped, killed, or ordered violence even from behind bars. Inside ADX, everything was built for isolation. Each cell is a 7 by 12-foot concrete box. The bed, desk, and stool are made from poured concrete. Windows are slit-like, angled so inmates can see only the sky, never the horizon. Visuals. Camera glides through empty corridors. Heavy doors slam shut with echoing metallic thuds. Close-up of surveillance cameras and laser sensors. Inmates spend 23 hours a day in their cells. Their recreation time is 1 hour, alone, in a small concrete pen known as the cage. The prisoners here include names known around the world: Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber; Ramzi Youssef, who bombed the World Trade Center in 1993; Richard Reed, the shoe bomber; Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, the Boston Marathon bomber; and Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, the drug lord who escaped every prison, except this one. ADX Florence isn't chaos. It's order. Sterile, controlled, and absolute. Here, time doesn't pass. It simply stops. This is the place where America hides the people it fears most, and where the human mind begins to disappear. When control goes too far, the lawsuits that changed everything. By the early 1990s, America had fully embraced the Supermax model. Every state wanted its own fortress, a place where the worst of the worst could vanish. But soon, something unexpected happened. The courts began to take notice. California's Pelican Bay State Prison, opened in 1989, was supposed to be a clean, efficient solution to prison violence. Instead, it became a nightmare laboratory of isolation. Inmates were kept in windowless concrete cells for 22 to 24 hours a day. They ate alone, exercised alone, and were punished for even whispering through the vents. Then came the lawsuit that cracked the facade. Madrid versus Gomez, 1995. The court examined the psychological toll of long-term isolation. The judge's words were devastating. Conditions at Pelican Bay may press the outer bounds of what most humans can psychologically tolerate. The ruling declared that extreme isolation for mentally ill inmates violated the Eighth Amendment, protection against cruel and unusual punishment. This was the first time the U.S. legal system acknowledged what prisoners had been saying for years. Solitary confinement isn't just control, it's destruction. The lawsuit didn't close Pelican Bay, but it forced change. Officials began to reconsider the limits of human endurance, though not nearly enough. Because even as one courtroom raised questions, new Supermax prisons were already rising. The expansion era. America builds a wall of prisons. From 1990 to 2005, the U.S. prison population exploded, fueled by the war on drugs, 3 strikes laws, and political campaigns promising to be tough on crime. The result? An entire generation of Supermax prisons, sterile fortresses built to isolate, not rehabilitate. Each state built its own version of hell. Red Onion State Prison in Virginia, nicknamed Little Guantanamo. Ohio State Penitentiary, where lights never go out. Tams Correctional Center in Illinois, designed to break gang control, but broke minds instead. In 2006, a national report estimated over 25,000 inmates were living in Supermax conditions. Each alone, each trapped in silence. One warden proudly described his facility as a place where time stands still. But for the people inside, time didn't just stand still. It disappeared. America had built an empire of control. But what happens when control becomes inhuman? The mind on lockdown. Scientists began to study what long-term isolation does to the human brain. And what they found was terrifying. Inside the Supermax cell, sensory deprivation is near total. No color, no touch, no sound except the hum of ventilation. After months, brain scans showed reduced neural activity. The mind literally shutting down from lack of stimulation. Prison psychologists began reporting SHU syndrome, paranoia, hallucinations, emotional breakdowns, memory loss. One inmate at ADX wrote, "I count the dots on the wall to remind myself I still exist." And yet, isolation continued to spread, defended as safety, security, and deterrence. But in reality, These prisons were creating something else, psychological decay that extended far beyond their walls. When men finally left these cells, many after decades, they entered society broken, numb, and unable to function. They weren't rehabilitated. They were erased and released. Lawsuits and lockdown reform. By the 2010s, a new wave of resistance began. Inmates, lawyers, and journalists started exposing the psychological cost of America's obsession with control. The most famous case, Ashker v. Governor of California, a class-action lawsuit led by inmates who had been held in solitary confinement at Pelican Bay for over a decade. After years of legal battles, the state finally agreed to major reforms. Thousands of inmates were moved out of indefinite solitary. New limits were set on how long anyone could be held in isolation. Step-down programs were introduced to reintroduce prisoners to normal housing. It was one of the biggest legal victories against Supermax confinement in American history. But not everyone was celebrating. Corrections officials warned, without isolation, chaos will return. Advocates countered, without humanity, there's nothing left to save. Life inside ADX Florence today. Today, ADX Florence still stands. Cold, silent, unbreakable. It remains home to over 350 of the most high-profile inmates in America. Every detail is engineered for control. The food tray slides through a steel slot. The intercom buzzes twice a day. The only human contact may be a glimpse of a guard's boot under the door. Among its walls are the remnants of the nation's fears, from domestic terrorism to organized crime. And while the rest of the country debates reform, ADX remains a monument, meant to one belief, that absolute isolation equals absolute safety. But not even that is guaranteed. Inmates have taken their own lives, smeared messages on walls, and begged for transfer, even to death row, just to escape the silence. In the shadow of the Rockies, men disappear, not by execution, but by time. The future of control. As technology evolves, so does control. The next generation of Supermax facilities may not rely on walls, but on data. Biometric scanners, AI behavior tracking, neural monitoring for threat detection. What began as Alcatraz's fog-covered island has evolved into a digital panopticon, a world where surveillance never sleeps. From Alcatraz to ADX Florence, America's prisons tell one story: that control has always been the goal. But in chasing control, we may have built something worse than chaos. A world where freedom isn't taken by bars. It's lost in silence. What you just saw is more than a story. It's a reality lived by thousands behind bars. If you believe in uncovering the truth, the kind hidden behind concrete walls and silence, then join us. Subscribe to Behind Bars TV and never miss a chapter in the world's most dangerous stories. Until next time, stay aware, stay informed, and remember, freedom and confinement are sometimes only a wall apart.